This is the Remix Austin Meetup. My name is Brooks. I've been running this meetup for like 3 or so years with Grant, who's not here tonight, and a couple other folks. I've been helping with other various things, such as website foreshadowing for another time. You'll have to come back to that one. Yeah, this is the Remix Meetup. We talk about Remix and React Router and just the web in general, building on the web and just cool ideas. Tonight we're actually really not talking about, well, we are talking about Remix, but I'm not going to spoil that. We're talking about Inertia. That's all I'll say. So yeah, that's pretty much what it is. Yeah, tonight Nick is going to be talking about Remix in reverse. So super excited about this talk. If you don't know Nick, he's pretty cool, and he's given a version of this talk probably at 2 different other meetups.
No,
This is completely different.
Yeah.
It's Inertia. That's right.
Yeah.
Everything else was like whatever.
Yeah.
Cool. That was the other stuff. Yeah. As always, though, I'm always looking for other speakers. Actually, I said this, but I have the next 2 speaker slots filled out. So anyway, if you want to give a talk, let me know. I'm not as desperate as I was last month for speakers, but I'm still always a little bit desperate. I like to keep it that way. Yeah, I don't really have much else in the way of announcements, at least not right now. So I'm just going to let Nick take it away.
Brooks sent out the email last week, I think, saying we needed a speaker. So I put this together. This is the first time I'm doing it, so a little bit of leeway, please. But I do think it will be interesting. And it is about Remix, but it's also about Inertia, which is another library. So I'm gonna, talk about that stuff. Right. So Remix in reverse, or how backend engineers who wanted to build good UIs arrived at an amusingly inverted solution to the same problems Remix solved. So a little bit about me. Full stack engineer, mostly Ruby on Rails, but in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of React stuff. Sort of all in line with that over the course of like the last 18 months, I've just been doing a bunch of sort of research into all kinds of front end stuff. You read all these people talking shit on Twitter, and I wanted to be involved and I wanted to know what was going on. So I had to learn about all of this stuff. And while doing so, I played around with Remix. I played around with this other library called Inertia, and sort of saw some amusing similarities between the two. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Yeah, so what does this talk about? It's about Inertia. No, they don't go backwards. Okay. You guys are just going to look at my notes. I'm just going to share the other screen and don't leave the stuff on the right without getting hung up on this buoy. Okay, yeah. So what is Inertia? Oh, and I don't move the Zoom window too. It's on my notes. This is excellent. All right. So Inertia is a library that lets you add a sort of modern stateful UI to a traditional MVC framework. So if you're not aware, an MVC framework means model view controller. Representative examples are Rails, Phoenix, Laravel, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Is that how you pronounce it? What is it?
I've written
Laravel? I think it might be Laravel. I said Laravel and I felt like that wasn't right. And then Django is another one. And so, Remix is a library that lets you sort of kind of seamlessly add our React front end to your sort of very traditional kind of page-based MVC frameworks. So the driving force behind Inertia is that building good UIs on those old frameworks is really hard. So sort of the vanilla experience is sort of like full page reloads on every page. Multi-step workflows are just horrible because you have to persist state on the server. You can't just put it in JavaScript on the front end. And then we'll talk about this HTML over the wire libraries in a second. Right. Okay. So sort of the context for this whole talk is that building good UIs over a slow, unreliable network is hard, right? So every network request takes between 1 and 500 milliseconds. And it makes it just a huge pain in the ass to keep data in sync, handle server errors, and just deal with latency in general. Makes everything about making a UI over the web difficult. And so sort of in my mind, navigating this network boundary is kind of the primary challenge now in building sort of the best UIs that you can. There have sort of been sort of big advancements on both the client and the server, right? So on the client, we have all of React, Vue, Svelte, all these stateful frameworks that do sort of all the DOM manipulation for us. And then on the server, there's been a bunch of sort of advancements and all the cloud hosting, and Postgres is a thing now. It wasn't 20 years ago. I don't know. Who knows how old Postgres is? Anybody? 20 years? Something like that. So everything on either side of the equation has gotten a lot better. But now sort of the bottleneck in the equation is dealing with the network and coordinating the two sides of the equation. Yeah, so two trends. So the first one is that front-end engineering is crossing over the network boundary and is starting to muck about on the back end. So you have the primary thing is Node running JavaScript on the server-side rendering, server components, server actions, which I'm still not totally sure what those are. And then you have meta frameworks like Remix and Next are the two big ones. And then similarly, you have back engineering crossing over the network boundary and starting to futz around on the front end. And so I guess the term now is HTML over the wire, right? So you have HTMX, Rails has, and I think most of the MVC plugins have sort of integrated versions of HTMX. And so this is where you're still out storing state on the client, but you're not doing full page reloads. You're rendering partials on the server and you're sending these snippets over the wire and sort of inserting them into the DOM. And then sort of pushing this idea sort of as far as you can go. You have something called Phoenix Live View, where basically a bunch of back engineers were like, we really like declarative stateful templates. We just don't like having them on the client. We're going to pick them up. We're going to move them. We're going to put them on the server, and everything you would call client state, we're just going to do on the server. And so you see these sort of two things kind of trying to sort of cross over the gap. So all of these tools, and I see this everywhere. I think I even see this on the Remix site. They talk about offering a spa-like experience, an SPA-like experience. This is on the, I've seen this on the Remix site, right? I think so, yeah.
Yeah, we say spa-like.
I know everybody says spa-like experience. And so it begs the question of why not just do a spa, right? And so a single page application, you have sort of a stateful front end, you have a RESTful back end, and they're both basically just completely decoupled. You have, React on the server, and then you have your API in the background, and you figure out how to get them to talk. And so the problems are, how do you do routing? How do you load data into your components? How do you keep data in sync? Are you handling network latency? Are you doing caching? Are you doing SSR? Does your API need to be running on Node? God forbid. And then a big one is, are you able to commit your entire application to being a spa? Because if you're doing a spa, you can't really sort of do part of your application of the spa. You kind of have to do the whole thing. And so this gets into the whole where the progressive enhancement, where it's sort of a traditional spa, you don't really have progressive enhancement. You're sort of all in everywhere, doing your spa. Right. So spa offers no help in how to never navigate the challenges of the network. You're on your own on how to solve these problems. And a lot of times you end up sort of solving each individual problem in isolation. And you get this sort of hodgepodge of client and server libraries all solving individual pieces of it. And they're all kind of discordant. And so in the end, your application sort of keep adding stuff to it, and none of it is sort of working well together. And the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. The front end isn't coordinating with the back end. And so, yeah, now we get to sort of what we're going to be talking about, which is modern tools trying to offer the user experience of a spa with kind of an integrated solution to the navigating these challenges around the network boundary, unless you get spa-like. All right, so now we're going to be talking about Remix and Inertia. What I'm going to do is basically go through and compare these two libraries and how they solve some of these different problems, and how they both try and coordinate the other side of the equation, with Remix coming from the front end, and then Inertia kind of coming over from the back end. And I'm specifically going to be focusing on these three things: routing, data loading, and action handling. Just focusing on the network. Both of the libraries do a bunch of other stuff for usability of the site, and I'm ignoring all of that, just these two things. So yeah, high-level overview of Inertia. It is a library. They call it a protocol on the website, that lets you basically take a traditional MVC and kind of effortlessly add a stateful front end to it without having to do a bunch of work. The way it works in practice is you install a server library and a client library. So there's adapters for Rails, Phoenix, Django, and then Vue, Svelte, and React, and you kind of pick your poison. You install one on each of the other side, and they handle communication between the two. In practice, what you get is a link and a form tag. You get a bunch of other stuff, but those are the big ones. You get a link and a form tag on the front end that you can put in your React components that will handle and sort of communicate the right way to coordinate with the backend. What are we getting next? Yeah, okay, so we're gonna go into the details. Before I do that, question? No? All right, let's go. So first, sort of a review of routing and Remix. This is kind of an example. You get this file-based routing. And I think for the nested routes, you can both do directories for the higher level stuff too. You don't have to do the dot. Okay. Two different ways to do it, but you have file-based routing. Specifically, the routes in Remix are defined on the server, and they are used on that initial page load. Notably, and I didn't realize this until like 2 days ago, the Remix has routes on both the server and the client. So you define all the routes on the server. They're used on the initial page load, but then they also get serialized to the front end and sent into React Router, where the client also does sort of route management. And yeah, kind of like Inertia, you have these integrated link and form tags and a bunch of other stuff. And so here we see sort of the first point of coordination between the front end and the back end, where we're not just relying on the front end to do routing. We're having the server do it as well because it allows for a better experience, specifically around sort of SEO and that initial page load of like when I go to the page, do I just see a spinner while it waits for data to load? Yeah. So routing in Inertia is similar, but completely different. So in these traditional MVC frameworks, your routes are usually defined in they're not file-based. They're defined in a routing file, which I think you can do in Remix too. You can have a real okay. So you can also have a routing file in Remix. But yeah, I guess now, well, 7 just came out. And they, because I was reading the docs and they have the frameworks. So, okay. Yeah.
So in 7, we added the config-based route, which is
that
pretty
was part of
similar.
7. Okay.
You got it.
So it used to be the file-based thing. Now you can do both.
You do either,
You can
but
do either.
yeah.
And then maybe moving in this direction. Yeah. But so all the MVC frameworks, they all have these routing files where you just define routes, and those get mapped to sort of event handlers similar to what you would put in the React route files. Notably, in Inertia, there is no client-based routing. There's only server-based routing. And what I mean by that specifically is like, what do you mean by routing is how do you map the route to what like React component needs to get rendered? In Inertia, that is all done on the server. The client has no idea when you click on a link what component ultimately you're going to be rendering until the server tells you. Whereas in Remix, the client does know before it needs to load data. So yeah, you use this for both the initial page load and for subsequent navigations. There's no client-side routing. Yeah, okay. So the integrated link tag doesn't actually do any routing. It just prevents the page reloads and intercepts the link clicks. So this is the response you get back from Inertia when you make requests to the server. And notably, you don't just send back the props, you send back the component and the URL, because the server is the one that's managing those things and it's deciding for which route, which component do I render. Whereas in Remix, you would just send back the props because the client already knows what it needs to be rendering. So this is the first big difference. They're both similar in that they have routes on the server, but Inertia only does routing on the server. Oh, right. Okay. Trade-offs. This is actually important. So in Remix, because the client knows what component needs to be rendered, when you click on a link, you can render the skeleton of that component and display a loading state specific for that component. In Inertia, you can't do that. When you click on a link in Inertia, the client doesn't know what's coming. So it just has to wait. So you can display loading states based on where you were, but not based on where you're going. Whereas in Remix, you can display loading states based on where you're going. Yeah. Okay. So what did I say here? Sometimes I read these notes and you're going, what was I on about? Oh, right. Okay. So even like just in the routing, you're already seeing this idea of kind of engineering the other side of the equation to accommodate the needs of what you're looking for. So in Remix, it moves the routing over to the server side to handle that initial page load. And then Inertia, it basically builds its front end navigation to support the routing that you already have on the back end to basically accommodate what you already have on the back end. Yeah, so now we're going to do data loading. So for data loading, I guess, yeah. So the big question is sort of, this is before we get into Remix or Inertia, is sort of who's responsible for loading a component's data? Is it the component or is it the route? Because you can have individual components load their own data via, use effect or some data loading library, and it's nice and encapsulated. But you get this problem of the waterfalls on the website where a component doesn't necessarily know what its children are yet. So you have to load the parent component. It has to get its data from the server while displaying the little spinner. And then it says, oh, these are the children. They all need to go get their own data. And so you get these cascading waterfalls. The alternative is having the route manage all the data loading. And so if you just define all the data you need to load at the route level, when you hit a route, you can just say, give me all the data I'm going to need. I display one spinner or none. And then I can just render everything. If you do it on the component level, you get this nice encapsulation. If you do it at the route level, you get this, you don't have the spinners, but you're sort of tightly coupling your component tree to your route, and your routes and your data loading now need to be aware of all of the subcomponents that are sort of under there. So that it can load all the data at once. So it's a little bit more work for the developer, but it's a much better user experience. Yeah. Yeah. So trade-offs. Yeah. Okay. So data loading in Remix.
I got a question on that
Yeah,
last slide, if
go.
you don't mind.
Where are we going here?
Yeah. So you're talking about trade-offs versus the component loading versus the route loading.
Yeah.
And so I know in the Remix case, it's all kind of tied to the route. Is that the same for Inertia as well?
Yeah. So I'm going to show you examples, but basically, yes. In Inertia, it's all purely based on the full route. In Remix, there's sort of this really nice idea of the nested routes, which is honestly fantastic. I love the nested routes for the data loading. And so, yeah, so data loading in Remix. This is, your route file. And so you have your loader function at the top, and then you're rendering some component at the bottom. You load the data in the loader function, and then you just return the props that go back to it. Right. So I'm distracted. Okay. Yeah. So when you get a request, you just execute the data loader for that route. And specifically in Remix's case, you execute all of the nested data loaders, which is a really interesting idea. Because you kind of get the best of both worlds where you get to load all your data at once. You're defining all of your data needs for the whole page. But when you do it in this sort of nested fashion, you basically couple it to the most important components on the page. And there's this really great graphic on the Remix website where they basically show the path URL and are sort of outlining the idea that each subpath is kind of mapping one-to-one with the primary components of the page. And so the route, like if you imagine your component structure is this big tree, the route kind of maps one-to-one with the trunk of the tree. And so if you break your data loading up by the subpaths with this nested routing, you get the best of both worlds. So you get to load all your data at once, and then you also get to sort of encapsulate each part of it into a nice sort of self-contained component. Yeah.
And really this only benefits client side, right? Because on server side, you're going to rip through all the nested routes, load all the data, but then you do a client side navigation that's only going to get the nested routes that it needs, let's say.
So yes. So when you do like subsequent page navigation, Remix, my understanding is it will only load the subpaths that it needs to, right? It won't execute all the data loaders. But I don't even think that's the best benefit, is limiting the like data traversal over the network. I think the best benefit is the developer experience of being able to say like, this subpath kind of represents these ideas and is responsible for loading this data. But yes, when you do subsequent page navigation, you don't have to hit all the data loaders every time, which is different from Inertia. Inertia is not as good about it, which is why I like Remix a lot. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So data loading in Inertia. So we have the same route file. This down here is the sort of equivalent of the route handler. So this is what's called a controller in Rails. A controller is basically responsible for loading data and building a response. Notably, the controller does not have the templates in it, right? There's no React or HTML templates in this file. They live somewhere else. Rails has a bunch of conventions for like naming that it'll automatically map to the right files, but they're not all in one place. But you do have the equivalent of your data loaders and your actions in this file. And so here we have, this is like the Inertia version of a Rails controller where we have this route, get dashboard, it maps automatically to this index action, and then we render this Inertia component. And specifically, we tell the client what component to render, because again, there's no client-side routing. The client doesn't know what component to render. So we give it the component and we give it the props, and then we just send it back over the wire. And so the advantage as like a Rails developer is this is like exactly how I would write a regular Rails controller. The only difference is instead of just, the way it works in Rails is you load them into an instance variable. It's just a variable prefixed with an ampersand, and that you can automatically get interpolated into like view templates. Here, you load your data the same way, get dashboard stats, and then you just render this Inertia component. And so it looks very similar and works almost identical to how sort of vanilla Rails works. And then Inertia under the hood is handling the fact that it's not an actual or like a regular HTTP request. You're not doing a full page reload on the client. You're not sending back HTML. What else? Oh, right. No nested routes. So in Inertia, you are relying on the existing routing system of the underlying framework, which do nesting in a different way. But ultimately, you're hitting one route with one handler, and you have to load all the data for the whole page. A little bit less efficient, a little bit less, not as good of a developer experience, but you still get a really good user experience of not having cascading waterfalls. So that stuff doesn't happen. To do nesting in something like Rails, you do it via like the class hierarchy. So if you had like admin/dashboards, you would have an admin controller, and then the dashboard controller would inherit from like instead of application controller, this would say admin controller. And then you could do it where the admin controller loads the admin data for all the stuff that gets wrapped under it. And then this controller just loads the little dashboard part of it. So you can still get the same sort of developer like co-location of concerns. But you have to do it a little bit more manually. It's not sort of gate dead. Yeah. Nested rendering. Oh, layouts. Inertia has no outlet function. I don't know how the outlet function works. Is it a function or is it a macro? What is it?
It's a component.
It's a component?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Inertia doesn't have one of those. If you want to do layouts, you have to manually do it in your components. You have to define a layout component and put it in your component tree. Not as nice, but it's still pretty good. Questions, data loading, Remix, Inertia.
Dude, this top part, config/routes.rv
Yeah.
looks nested to me, but is this just saying like,
Yeah, so
This is how you
these
do
projects,
dependencies?
so these project routes are nested under dashboard. So it'd be dashboard/project.
but they're not fetched independently. They're just like top and bottom. And
Yes,
that's
they're
that.
not fetched independently. It's one request going to one fully mapped out route. But you can do data loading via this sort of superclassing. In practice, what happens is you end up with a file structure very similar to Remix's. That's sort of like the, I don't know, best practice, but that's like the default way of doing things is your routes, your file structure for these controllers maps pretty much one-to-one with your route structure via this scoping, or there's more sophisticated versions of it. But you end up with something that looks pretty much the same. And so you'll have these like before actions. So like your admin could have a before action of like load admin data. And then you just, at the end though, you do all merge it into a single request. Inertia does actually have a feature though, where like when you're navigating on a page within like a sub page and you don't need all of the data for the full route, you can explicitly specify only give me certain keys within this props because I don't need the rest. And so you could make something work where in practice, you're not actually loading all the data, but it doesn't come like that otherwise.
In the layouts.
Yeah.
So it says that okay, it's had some layouts or doesn't have.
You can implement layouts manually. And it does have these things called persisted layouts, where you can give layouts state. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but it's a way of not having to reload, like not having to re-render the outer components on the page. But in practice, I think you're doing most of it sort of manually in your React component files.
Okay, so if we're talking about the layout, for example, if we need to load the project, for example, projects, it will download from the server fully the page like a component, or is like a partial of the component?
You can do it both ways. The default behavior is just to load the whole thing, but you can set up layouts on the front end where you're only loading and re-rendering a subcomponent. You just have to be more explicit about it. I don't have an example set up, but. Okay, action handling. So this is sort of the third piece of the puzzle. So sort of the same idea. We have our loader function at the top, we have our component at the bottom, and then here we have the action. Like the loader, this is all loading. This is all being done on the server. One thing that's really nice about Remix is that you sort of co-locate all of these pieces of the puzzle, the route, the loader, the action, and then error boundaries, which I'm not going to get into. But it's all in one file, which is one thing I really like. Inertia kind of does it with the loading and the actions being done in the same file, but not everything, and so it feels a little bit different. Right, so like all the action handling in Remix is sort of deeply integrated to how it does like forms on the front end. So forms have their default route being the current route of the page, and so we'll just automatically get mapped to a specific handler. And then you can do the whole intents thing. Frameworks like Rails kind of have like default conventions around the idea of like intents and like default actions that sort of try and map to like RESTful actions. You can kind of break out of that whenever you want. But similar to Remix, you can sort of do this sort of update layout versus the default. Oh, right. So one of the cool things enabled by all this data loading and the action handling is the data revalidation idea, which when I first read the docs, I didn't understand. But the idea is when I went and played around with Remix and figured out what was going on was when you execute one of these action handlers and you mutate some data, instead of trying to have the like sending back some small response of either successful or here's the updated resource that you like the main resource you touched, and then having other components on your front end, like try and figure out what they need to do based on that change, like listening to events or state changes on the front end. And, oh, do I need to go get, like, do I need to update my data based on the thing that happened over there? Remix is just like, no, F all that, just rerun all of the loaders for this route. So when you mutate stuff on the page, you don't have to try and figure out what else on the page needs to be updated as a developer. And you can only do that because Remix has explicitly defined loaders for the whole route. So when you mutate stuff, you can just say, run them all again, send it all back over, and just refresh the page with all the up-to-date data. Namely, because when you change one thing, usually you're not just changing one thing, you're changing a bunch of stuff.
It will be on the server side or on the front end? This revalidation.
In the revalidation,
Yeah.
I actually don't know. I think it happens I think the front end triggers all the data loaders individually on the back end.
Your actions and your loaders always run on the server.
Okay.
So it's revalidating on the front end, but it's still SPA, so it's not a hard refresh.
Yeah, so it doesn't refresh the page, but so you get the request, you update the data, you get some response back, and then the front end says for all of the sub routes. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it happens on the front end. You get the response from the mutation back, and then Remix on the front end says, here's my route. let me hit all of the data loaders asynchronously and then just refresh the data on the page, but not refresh the page. Yeah. Yeah, so in Inertia, works a little bit differently. So here's the same sort of controller. Here we have an update method. You define in your route file, in this case, put dashboard, is for like mutating an individual record. Here, there's nothing, this is actually my favorite part of Inertia. There's nothing in this update action that is any different from how things work in vanilla Rails. Inertia is handling everything under the hood. And so what's happening is that Inertia recognizes that it's getting an Inertia request from the client. And then rather than sending back rendered HTML, it just sends back, I mean, you send your redirect, and then the client figures out that it's getting a redirect, and rather than reloading the whole page at that new URL, it just sends an XHR request to the server again for that specific route, which would bounce back up to this index action and just reload all the data. Yeah, so sort of similar to, well, actually, hold on, let's. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. So kind of like Remix, where once you start to integrate the two sides of the equation, you get to sort of see the power of doing so. So in the case of Remix, you get to do this whole data revalidation idea. And in the case of Inertia, you get to write all the code you already know how to write exactly the way you know how to write it. And it all just works under the hood to have a nice spa-like experience. And that works with action handling as well. Yeah, so that's kind of it. So the idea is sort of that when you coordinate how your front end and your back end work together, you just get to offer both a better user experience and you get to have a better developer experience. And I think you're going to see more of that as people tie their front ends and back ends to each other specifically, rather than having sort of agnostic independent pieces. Because when everything's agnostic, you lose out on a bunch of both the developer experience and the user experience. And so having strong conventions on both ends of the equation, it lets you do more than just standardize how engineers solve problems. You can sort of offer experiences you just otherwise wouldn't be able to do. Yeah, so in my mind, sort of the thesis of Remix is, how would I engineer a backend to offer the absolute best user experience possible? Right. So like, what would the backend have to look like to do that? And then for Inertia, the idea is, what would the front end have to look like for me to take my traditional MVC backend and offer sort of a 90% of a modern UI without having to rewrite the whole thing, which if you like, once you start trying to integrate React into Rails, it can become kind of a big pain really quickly. And so Inertia sort of gets you 90% of the way there with no effort. Yeah, that's it. Questions?
What actually about the support, about the information, about community around these technologies? Is it okay? You have the something on the Stack Overflow, or maybe something like this Medium?
Oh, let's say that again, the community?
Do you have the support from the community actually? If you have some problem, experience some problem that you cannot solve, and you go to the Stack Overflow with the React, you can find anything here. Names.js, almost.
So they both have lively communities. I would imagine that the Remix as a framework is larger than Inertia, significantly. So much so that when I was originally looking at Inertia, it almost looked like a dead library. Like there were a bunch of people on the internet that were like, this thing's great, but they haven't updated it in a while. We don't know what's going on. 3 months ago, 6 months ago, they released like a whole version 2, and now they're all sort of cooking again. So there's definitely life in it. I certainly like it. But community-wise, you're probably better off with Remix.
I mean, my question here, if, for example, we start a new project, and for example, I have to choose a subject between, and I have the, for example, Next.js with the whole infrastructure, with all this support, new updates, and a large community,
It's going to be less than that. It's there, but it's nowhere near Next or Remix in terms of the availability of people talking about it. They're online or
Yeah. Thanks.
So when you were trying out Inertia, what backend framework did you use it with? Rails.
Yeah.
Okay. Any sense of how it integrates into something like Laravel?
So I'm almost certain it integrates better into Laravel because it came from Laravel.
Yeah.
And the Laravel community is certainly more interested in it than the Rails community, though the Rails people do like it. It is 100% significantly more popular amongst the Laravel developers.
Did you find that like there was a lot of layers of trends? So you're working in your app.
Yeah.
Did you find that like you're writing Ruby, you might be writing some templates, and you might be writing some Inertia and then some like React to go with it or something? Did you find that like jumping through each of those layers is hard to juggle mentally when building?
No. One, you're basically writing no inertia. You're just writing React, and then there's like slight adjustments in how your like the controllers work. In terms of like writing React and Ruby, I have no problem with it. I know React well. I can sort of switch between the two. I like Ruby a lot. And I'm kind of like, having everything in one language, I think offers a lot. And I think I underestimated. I mean, like, I don't know. People talk about running JavaScript on the server. They have a lot of feelings about it. I think 2 years ago, I would have been like, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard of. But then I started reading about it. I'm like, wait, okay, I kind of do want my templates over here and not have them be duplicated. I kind of want to define everything in one place. And it really is nice to have these two pieces integrated. And I don't know, maybe I'll just get better at JavaScript and kind of take it. But no, I found it to be almost effortless. Like it works really well. You write the Rails that you know, and then you write React to go on top of it, and they layer together really well. And specifically, you don't have to learn a bunch of client-side libraries and like piece together a front-end stack. You literally just, it's vanilla React, this little shim that goes in it, and then the Rails that you know, or the Laravel that you know. So no, it's really good. Yeah. And I guess there's one related point about progressive enhancement. And so Remix talks about this a lot. Inertia is really good about progressive enhancement. You don't have to like, you can just start with a huge Rails application, add the Inertia libraries, write some React components and have them load on one part of one page. And so you can sort of just insert little pieces of it and sort of start to grow it out from there very effortlessly. And so that part is huge.
Meaning Inertia would integrate into a template?
No, not. So you would still have a separate like React component.
Page level.
It would be a page level thing. But I mean, you can just transform one page at a time. And then like, as you start to add more, they all connect automatically where they're not doing full reloads between pages. And so that part of it is sort of a huge selling point to Rails developers and Laravel developers and Phoenix developers, where you can sort of start to layer this in one piece at a time. Yeah. Well, it was my pleasure. Happy to sort of show you guys something I learned. I don't know, enjoy the rest of your evening.
So that's what we did. Again, yeah, if you have ideas or things you want to share, just reach out to me. What's up? Yeah, you know, maybe soon. We'll see. Yeah, if you just some things going on in Remix React router world. If you're not subscribed to the newsletter, I would definitely recommend subscribing to it. Ignore the thing I'm about to show you because it's really ugly. All right. So if you just go to remix.run/newsletter, it's up to date. Or that'll get you up to date, sorry, with what's going on. If you don't know, we have a conference actually coming up on October 10th. I will tell you now, the best way to know when tickets go on sale is by signing up on that newsletter. And there's not going to be a lot of tickets. So if you really want to go to this, I would definitely recommend doing that and just getting ready to hit the button because we're expecting it's a long ways away. You don't have to go. This is totally just if you want to go. I cannot make that decision for you. That's if you want to do it. Shopify's headquarters is in Toronto, so that saves me a lot of headache to do it there. So let's see what else is going on. Yeah, RC is coming. We've been teasing it a little bit, so be on the lookout for that. And then we have some other stuff we're gonna be talking about pretty soon. So I don't have a ton of updates on my end. Oh, actually, I will say this. I'm gonna have to go to Twitter for this. Sorry. Ooh, come on. Sorry, if you're an anti-Twitter person, close your eyes. I'll find a tweet. Yeah. So last week, the remix team worked on a bug bash. So we closed like 77 issues and merged in 33 pull requests, a ton of different stuff. So on React Router, we still have a ton of like, we have 150 issues, but this was at like 216, I think, when we started. So we have been trying to make an effort to close issues and to address problems that you have. So hopefully that goes a long way for the community. But yeah, be looking out for the next release. Has like, I think 30 updates, which is kind of scary. Most of them are bug fixes though, like only like 3 are.
Is that a royal we? You're just like you and you.
It's the we that means other people, whatever that we is. So I work mostly on the templates, so the templates are all up to date. So if you haven't used them in a while, they're more up to date. So I think that's all I have from like remix specific team world. But yeah, please stick around. We've got this place till like 40 till 9, so 45 more minutes. So if you didn't meet someone, you want to meet them, definitely meet them. Want to talk to people around you. If you want to ditch, that's also cool. Also, sorry if we ran out of food. We had more people than expected, which is definitely a good problem to have. So thank you everyone for coming.